Now, my name's Gillan Wood. I'm the Associate Director for Education and Research at the Institute for Sustainability. And it's my great pleasure to be the Director of the new Certificate in Environmental Writing offered here at the university. We have a program of 5 courses, which the theme of which is turning data into narrative. We take students from both the humanities and the social sciences and the physical sciences, all interested in the issues and challenges of environmental communication. We have an end product too, the only one of its kind in the country, an online magazine, well produced, professionally produced by our staff at iSEE. It's called Q Magazine. I ask you to look it up on the iSEE website. And we're very proud of our debut issue, which was launched only a few weeks ago, and features a story by a gentleman to my left, David Marcus, a star student from the Certificate in Environmental Writing. I've enjoyed having David in 2 of my classes. And on the theme of sustainable cities, well, I've had pieces on, I've had essays written by students on permeable pavement, on autonomous cars, on the landscape architectural history of Chicago. So a lot of themes that we've discussed today so far. But we chose to feature David's piece in particular today because he wrote about sea level rise in Florida and the dire situation in which the built environment along the Atlantic coast of Florida from Fort Lauderdale to Miami faces a dire situation with regard to blue sky flooding, storm surges, etc. So without further ado, I'm inviting David Marcus to the stage to read from his recently published debut article in Q Magazine called The Rising Tide. Please welcome David Marcus.
Hi guys. Hi everyone. Thank you. I'm just going to toss this. Oh, sure. Can everyone hear me? Pretty good? Cool. Okay. Hi, I'm David Marcus. Thank you very much, Gildan, for that lovely introduction. And thank you for iSEE for having me here. And this is just, I'm going to read you some excerpts from the piece I wrote for Q Magazine called The Rising Tide. I'm going to sum down a big article into like 5 minutes, so I'm just going to try to give you guys the brief version, read you some passages, and hopefully we can learn some cool stuff. So the article I wrote is about sea level rise in Miami, and before we talk about sea level rise in Florida, it's helpful to understand sort of the magnitude of sea level rise that we may well see in our lifetimes. So talking about the numbers, the United States Army Corps of Engineers predicts a 5-foot sea level rise by the year 2100. And the National Oceanic Administration predicts a sea level rise of up to 6.5 feet by the end of the century. Harold Wainless, the chairman of the University of Miami of Geological Sciences Department, has stated that he foresees a sea level rise of 10 feet or more by the year 2100. And according to Climate Central, a nonprofit news organization that analyzes reports on climate science, even if we were to keep global temperature rise below the 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit as the Paris Agreement specifies, sea levels may still continue to rise 20 feet into the next several hundred years. If this turns out to be the case, according to Zillow, nearly 300 U.S. cities will lose at least half of their homes by the end of this century, and 36 cities will be lost entirely. Yet just a 3-level rise, just a 1-foot sea level rise, could decimate coastal populations and submerge cities like Fort Lauderdale and Miami. Cool. So when we're talking about sea level rise, it's kind of an issue that's in future-oriented, and we think that maybe there will be some kind of technology that will come along, some godsend technology, or we could build a seawall, or we could build pumps, or something along those lines to try to keep out the rising tide. But the reality, especially on the ground in Florida, is much more complicated than that, because even if one continuous indestructible seawall were to be built along the entire Florida coastline, even if the state were outfitted with an army of dikes and water pumps and levees and walls, Florida still could not possibly be saved from the rising tide. Because the doom of Florida is going to be sealed by two words, which don't sound very scary, but those two words are porous limestone. And if you can picture a 40-foot thick layer of sponge beneath the ground, that is what underlies most of South Florida, including Miami and Fort Lauderdale. And Florida's limestone is very porous. It's full of tiny sort of little holes. And its porosity means that fluids, that water, can move through those interconnected pores with ease. And the significance of this limestone to Florida's future, it can't be overstated, because it will simply be impossible to it will be impossible to save the area from inundation because of it. The water, kind of like a scene of apocalypse, will literally come up from underground. Subsequently, by the midpoint of this century, if not sooner, Miami and Fort Lauderdale will be salty, wet marshes, kind of scarily on the way to being swallowed by the ocean entirely. Luckily, the United States has one major resource. I talk about this in the article, sort of what are our options going forward for Florida. In the United States specifically, what are our options with sea level rise? And luckily, the United States has one major resource that many states vulnerable to rising seas do not, which is abundant land to retreat to. And this makes managed retreat, kind of a funny word, the best option for South Florida residents. Retreat is obviously a hard pill to swallow, but it's better than the alternative, which is a sudden mass abandonment once water overwhelms the state or housing markets collapse or basic services sort of start to break down. Ultimately, it will probably be up to South Floridans to decide whether their migration is going to be orderly or if it's going to be hellish and chaotic, if they're going to plan for the future sensibly, or if they're going to stick to their guns until the water rises up to their doorsteps. But policies of managed retreat, massive federal programs to help the imperiled, these must be the talking points in an era of rising seas, as the waters will only continue to rise for centuries to come. If the higher-end sea level rise estimates of geologists turn out to become reality, sea levels may rise by 10 feet or more in the next several hundred years, and we face, in that case, a global human catastrophe unlike anything we have ever seen. It won't just be Miami and Fort Lauderdale. Climate Central estimates that nearly 150 million people around the globe currently live on land that will either be exposed to chronic flooding or submerged by the year 2100, and that number will only increase. And I ask you guys today, and going forward, how will global society absorb what will become the greatest mass exodus in human history? The point of the article, these big, scary questions, is not to frighten anyone, but it's rather to generate constructive discussion about the future that's awaiting us, that's coming. We're living in a world in which humanity is going to be facing challenges greater and more complex than any that we have faced before. And we here in the United States need to ask ourselves, I'm not sure if that's showing up on the screen. We're heading into a world that's very scary, and we here in the United States need to ask ourselves what kind of country we want to be in that future. Will we be a country that plans ahead responsibly and supports its citizens, or a country that reels from disaster to disaster and forsakes those in need? It's not a hypothetical, it's an action plan. The tide is rising, and South Floridans need to be the first to decide what to do about it. Hopefully their actions will serve as a model. And that's all I've got. Thank you.
Well, for those of you that are just joining us, it's been a really fantastic day. I'm Evan DeLucia, the director of our Institute for Sustainability, Energy, and Environment. Before I bring us home with our last event, I just want to say another word about David's presentation and about Q and the Certificate in Environmental Writing. This is in the true Illinois tradition of putting our students front and center. Under Gillen's leadership, creating the Certificate in Environmental Writing program and Q, the Institute was thinking, many of our sister institutes have national and international journalistic outputs, either web pages or blogs or many magazines, and we thought, well, what should we do in this space? And Gillen's brilliance and the university's priorities, through those two things, we've created Q. And the reason I'm underscoring that is I think, I'm not going to bet money on it, but I'm pretty sure it is the only student-run and student-edited environmental magazine in the nation. So I'm really, really excited about that and very, very proud of David and his cohort of students for launching this program. Okay, I'm very excited to welcome several distinguished guests here tonight to jointly affirm our campus and community commitment to climate resilience. We have Chancellor Robert Jones is joining us. Thank you very much. Champaign Mayor Deborah Feinen is here. Mayor Feinen took office in 2015, but has lived in Champaign for quite a long time. People put numbers in these speeches. I'll just spare the numbers so we don't have to go there. Prior to serving on council, she served as Champaign County board member for 14 years, and during that time served for several years as vice chair of the county board. She was then appointed to the Champaign City Council in 2006 as an at-large representative. We're very grateful for you taking the time to join us here this evening for the signing of our resilience commitment. Urbana Mayor Diane Marlin was unable to attend because of her travel schedule, but Urbana City Councilor Bill Brown is here. Thank you very much for joining us. He'll be representing the city of Urbana tonight. Bill Brown is Ward 4 Alderman for the city of Urbana. In his second term, Councilor Brown serves on the Cunningham Township Board, as well as the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission, which has several duties for sustainable transportation in and around the city. He's an 18-year member of the Champaign County American Civil Liberties Union, serving 3 years as its president. He served the past 4 years as the council representative on the Urbana Free Library Board. So thank you, Councilor Brown, for joining us and representing Urbana. Well, a little bit of history. I'll keep this short. In 2008, the University of Illinois signed the American College and University President's Climate Commitment. This is really a landmark moment for this campus. This commitment is to bring this campus to carbon neutrality no later than 2050, and it's paved the way for many campus's greatest sustainability accomplishments, including the 2010 and the 2015 Illinois Climate Action Plan, which is our roadmap to achieving carbon neutrality no later than 2050. In 2016, the university signed a second commitment, again sponsored by Second Nature's Resiliency Commitment, and this is going beyond our pledge to help mitigate the impact of climate. Unfortunately, it recognizes that climate change is already with us, and how do we manage climate change going forward? So this is a commitment to working with our communities, for the university to work with our communities to become more resilient to the anticipated impacts of climate change, including things like extreme heat, flooding, and public health impacts. Under the leadership of iSEE, members of the Champaign County Climate Resilience Task Force, including professors, subject matter experts at the University of Illinois and elsewhere, representatives from local organizations such as Carle Hospital, Champaign County Emergency Management Association, and the cities of Champaign and Urbana, and other relevant groups have worked to draft today's joint proclamation on resilience. The signing of this joint proclamation affirms that the campuses and governments of Champaign and Urbana have shared recognition of the threats arising from climate change, and that we can accomplish far more working together than separately when confronted with these challenges. As campus prepares for the next climate action plan, the principles in the climate resilience and community partnership will be present from the beginning of the drafting process through its 5-year implementation. It's important to note that today's proclamation is just a first step, setting in motion the development of plans that will secure a healthy and sustainable future for all of us in our greater community in the face of a changing climate system. So please join me in welcoming Chancellor Jones to read the joint proclamation, followed by its formal signing.
Well, let me start by saying good evening to everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you this evening for the reading of a proclamation affirming a local partnership for joint climate resilient efforts. Whereas there is strong scientific consensus that climate change is happening at an accelerated rate, and whereas in 2015, the mayor's National Climate Action Agenda declared the effects of climate change, extreme storms, wildlife, droughts, disruption of agriculture supply chains, and jobs in rural heartland, to name a few, are a clear and present danger. And climate change impacts such as severe storms, increased rainfall, flooding, extreme temperatures, variations have already begun to affect central Illinois. And whereas both the severity and frequency of major adverse weather events are projected to grow more severe in the decades to come, and whereas to ensure continued economic prosperity and the health and well-being of the community, actions must be taken to ensure the infrastructure of our community is resilient to climate change impacts. And whereas the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, in signing the President's climate commitment, has publicly pledged to begin coordinating with communities at large to research and support resiliency efforts. Therefore, we,
the City of Champaign,
and the City of Urbana,
and the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign do hereby proclaim that the cities of Champaign and Urbana, working alongside the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, affirm our joint commitment to bolstering our community's resilience to the impact of climate change. Thank you very much, and it is a great honor to be able to sign this proclamation with our key partners in this very vital community. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Just wants to stay up here, I think.
They want us to stay?
This one, he wants to stay up here.
Oh, okay, all right. I'll see you later. You guys got good work.
Right, well, thank you, Chancellor, and Mayor Feinen and Councilor Brown for signing that proclamation. We'd like to just continue this discussion a little more, and I'd like to invite Edith Makra, who is the Director of Environmental Initiatives at the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, to come to the stage as well, and to have a little more discussion about the role that our cities can play in increasing resilience to climate change. Let me just introduce Edith. Edith, as I said, is the Director of the Environmental Initiatives at the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, and that includes 275 cities, towns, and villages in the Chicago area. The caucus provides a forum for Metropolitan Chicago's elected officials to collaborate on common problems and work towards a common goal of improving the quality of life for the millions of people who call this region home. It is a voice for regional approaches to issues and challenges such as economic development, school funding and tax reform, and other infrastructure, housing, and emergency preparedness. Edith is no stranger to our campus. She's an alum of forestry at the University of Illinois, and so it's great to welcome you back. So we're going to have just short remarks from our three panelists, and then have a moderated discussion. So perhaps we can start with you and go from there.
Thank you so much for having me. It is great to be back, and it's great to be among such an appreciative audience and elected officials who are taking the lead on resiliency in our communities. I do have a few slides that I'll go through quickly, and then I'll be part of the panel to answer questions. So the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus is a council of governments. We're an umbrella cog, if you will, to other councils of governments, and that creates our leadership. We're a rather unique structure in governmental organizations, and it's only at the regional level that we have environmental staffing. So our municipalities have very few dedicated environmental or sustainability staff. We have it at the regional level, and then at the state level, there isn't sustainability staff, and you don't see it again until you get to the U.S. Conference of Mayors or National League of Cities. So it's a wonderful opportunity to work with elected officials and community leaders, but it also, given the breadth of the region that we have, we are in northeastern Illinois, although our study was inclusive of cities leading in Illinois, including Urbana-Champaign and others. But there was a real need to focus our work and prioritize and provide some real clarity, because even though the Mayor's Caucus has such a broad reach, there's only 4 staff and 1.5 staff working in environment, so there just really wasn't enough time or energy to be chasing ideas that didn't have resonance with communities, and that very much mimics what municipalities are facing. And there's, again, 275 communities, only 3 of them have full-time sustainability staff in our caucus. So we came up with this clever solution, and it's called the Greenest Region Compact. So what we did, fundamentally, it was a study that took us 2 years and to put the templates together, but we looked at everything communities across the region are doing, and this is where we picked up 290 cities, and then we looked at what they're already doing with programs in place and initiatives that are already successful. We then read all the sustainability plans that were already published by communities, and we synthesized that with outside experts, vetted it, sort of polished it, and put it together in what we call the Greenest Region Compact. And so it exists in 3 parts. The first is the actual compact, which is a pledge. Because we operate in a political environment and not every community has a strong appetite for a lot of details on this, we took all that research and study and saved it, we organized it, but we let float to the top the very high-level key goals. And that is actually the compact. So it exists on 2 pages. Am I showing? Let me get the view correct here. Sorry about that. Oh, thank you. Okay, now that's the one that I wanted you to see. So just the very tip of the iceberg, if you will, are these 10 goal categories. And beneath it it's simplified because it does fit on 2 pages, 49 goals. And they're very general in these 10 areas. And the 10 areas were driven by what we found in this through the research. And a few, we actually added leadership just because that's the way mayors think. So, for the purposes of this presentation, I pulled out the ones that are most specific to resiliency. So out of the 49, we have specific climate change goals, including the creation of climate change mitigation and adaptation plans, and then to engage the community, the idea of working collaboratively across with other partners external to municipalities towards a sustainable region. And there's a lot of focus in what we call the sustainable communities category on community vibrancy and social cohesion. And some of the topics that came in on the local food presentation. So there's more goals to it, but those are the ones specific. So we created this Greenest Region Compact, and then we offered it back to municipalities, including the ones that provided feedstock, if you will, for those sustainability, by providing their sustainability plans. We offered this consensus version back out to the municipalities, and as of last night, I got my 107th community, so it's a little odd number, but we keep growing, and all of our partner councils of governments have formally endorsed it as well. We have 5.3 million residents that are served by this compact now, and we've somehow grown to be the largest regional collaboration of municipal sustainability in the country. So we have this clarity on what we want to do. The goals are very clear. As I mentioned, we have all that research that we did. We left in an optional document called the GRC Framework. And this is aligned with all of the goals in the compact and offers a pathway, and it's structured in a way that provides a community could use it to create their own sustainability plan with tools and checklists and some links to get things done. But again, this is just a snapshot of our resiliency section that is aligned with the Develop Resiliency to Climate Change Impacts goal, including some very practical things that we also counted when we were doing the research, like preparing a pre-disaster hazard mitigation plan and filing that with FEMA. So I won't go into details here, but just wanted to let you know how our documents fit together. The third step is usually collaborative initiatives. So the Greenest Region Compact communities work with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, and we pursue, I listed mitigation of climate change activities first, because that's where most of our efforts have been. So we've done a lot of work on, for example, solar policy. We've been working with communities to help them streamline codes and policies to be prepared for solar, something really within the wheelhouse of what a community can do. We're looking at community solar procurements. I've been working on a new AmeriCorps program to provide temporary sustainability staffing to the communities. So these are the things that we're doing together. The resiliency piece, there's a lot of activity at the community level, but the Mayor's Caucus hasn't really led on that. So I'll address that in my remarks, but some of the things that the communities are doing and are very core to the purview, the authority, and the strengths of a municipality involve very essential public works services. So our public works departments are very critical in a community. They're very strong, strongly professional, very well organized, very collaborative. So that we do see a lot of our lead in resiliency under the banner of public works, and the mayor's nodding, so maybe you'll pick up on some of the things that I launched there. For example, in DuPage County, which has some 24 municipalities, they have a mutual aid agreement and response plans in place where they're available to share equipment and services, and they're trained and knowledgeable, and they have communication plans in place to help each other out in case of emergencies and disasters. We're strongly collaborative. Again, sort of a natural feature of local governments is they are strongly collaborative, working with partners. We have regional planning agency that has helped us with some resiliency assessments, particularly risks to flooding. And then social cohesion. So this is really important, and as I would say, along with the public works, is probably an area where municipalities really lead. It's very approachable to work in local government and then to be a part of it. So we really, it's the ground floor in terms of engaging with democracy, and it is possible for communities for residents to work together, partner with businesses and institutions, and come in and really be a part of solutions, collaborative solutions in government. We have structures in place like citizen commissions, which Councilor, I know you're volunteering on some of those, and maybe you'll want to talk about some of those, but these are literally groups of citizens that are commissioned by the municipality to provide guidance and input into important decision making. And we have some working on sustainability. You mentioned bicycle pedestrian commissions. Those are areas where there's just a lot of strength in terms of working together at the community level to solve problems and become more resilient. We've also put a lot of effort into water supply planning, which is both a strength and a weakness, and I can talk a little bit more about that on the panel, but that is one area where I would just say it's a high priority for municipalities, just because of the way there's sort of lack of regional, statewide regulatory oversight in terms of water supply planning and cooperation, so the municipalities have gotten together to work on some of those things. So. Thank you.
I don't have a slideshow. I think I am prompted primarily by what I heard. I think it's worth mentioning that, yes, our sustainability office is within our public works department, although our planning department also has a significant impact on sustainability in the city of Champaign. I think issues for us include the kinds of things that were mentioned. So certainly anybody who lives in Champaign-Urbana recognizes that flooding continues to be an issue within both cities. We certainly have climate-related flooding, and what we need to do with that infrastructure is something that the city continues to work on. With respect to water supplies, Mayor Marlin and I are both on the Aquifer Task Force that was appointed by the governor's office. And so we serve with many people from around the aquifer. So it's not just all Champaign-Urbana people. And our job is to identify potential threats to the aquifer and potential solutions to those threats. And our report is due by the end of the year to the governor's office, and then hopefully that prompts additional legislation around aquifer issues. So when we talk about, regional water supplies, for us, that's certainly one that is significant. I think with that, I'm going to take questions, but thank you for inviting me here. City of Champaign continues to be committed to sustainability. I know Mayor Marlin's not here and Bill is here for her, but she and I both signed on with U.S. Conference of Mayors relating to Paris Climate Accord when the president pulled out. We continue in both cities to be concerned about environmental issues and continue to work together. We recognize that regional work needs to be done. Neither of our cities are big enough to make significant impacts on our own, and so we need to be working together.
Yeah, I can just talk a little bit about where Urbana currently is with sustainability issues. We have a sustainability manager, Scott Tess, that some of you may know, whose main job is advising our Sustainability Advisory Commission and coming up with and implementing the Climate Action Plan. We're in phase 2 of our Climate Action Plan that originally started in 2013. Now we're in the second phase, gradually trying to implement the goals in that. We also have a water quality plan. And in the Climate Action Plan, there's pretty ambitious goals about CO2 reduction. That becomes kind of a political issue because there are a lot of people that care a lot about it in Urbana, so they push you to get bigger and bigger goals, so then you are kind of stuck using things like voluntary renewable energy credits and things like that may not have as much impact as some of us would like, but or you can count them towards your carbon reduction, your carbon footprint reduction. Urbana is Illinois' first, and I think still only gold level bicycle friendly community, so we believe strongly in implementing bicycle infrastructure, engineering, education, and encouragement, and trying to get people to live near where they work in order to be able to reduce transportation costs and carbon. We have a landscape recycling center that's pretty much self-supporting. People can take their yard waste and leaves. There's leaves pickups that goes there, and yard waste and all the tree waste. We have a really good arbor division that has to maintain all the urban forest along the trees, which provide obviously a lot of shade to reduce energy use, and also as a resiliency issue, maintaining the trees is important because if you have bigger storm events, you can reduce the damage from branches coming from trees. So it's a strong arbor division, I think, is important in that respect. We also have several community gardens, a lot of different scales of community gardens, from a neighborhood scale where people can just grow their own food or rent a plot, In some of the poorer neighborhoods, they don't have to pay for the plot. They can volunteer hours and get food from the garden. Up to larger scale community gardens run by churches that will actually sell produce at our farmers market, or even sell produce to Salt and Light. Those of you who are local probably have heard of that. It's a nonprofit grocery store, resale store, where they will hire people that have a hard time finding jobs, and also can get produce through that, locally grown produce through that. I guess I just mentioned on the aquifer, we do collaborate really well, I think, on the aquifer, and what instigated that really was Ameren recovery of some coal gasification plant sites where they took the waste or the soil, contaminated soil from those, and took it to a landfill, and the landfill was over the aquifer. There's a big aquifer that covers most of central Illinois. So people were really concerned about leakage from that, and I think one way collaboration with U of I could work is if they could study ways of treating that in place instead of having to dig it up and remove it. And so, if you're looking for a research project, think about that. So I think that's an overview. Thanks.
So thank you for those remarks. So as you know, you've all sort of brought up this issue about being concerned about water supply and another resource, and we've talked about food security and how do you deal with that if there are climate impacts. But we know, if we look ahead for some of the threats of climate in the next coming decades, in addition to increased storm events, variability, and flooding, which you've mentioned, there's also concerns about heat waves, cold waves, and effects on stormwater. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the cities are currently thinking about how we might prepare for longer-term events that might happen, many of which require thinking now in terms of changes to critical infrastructure and so on that are going to last for a long time. And so maybe just a little bit on how far that thinking is going. What do you see as some of the opportunities to prepare for that, and what might be some of the challenges?
Yep. Okay, I'm on. So flooding, we don't really want to move past flooding. It's really paralyzing for our communities. It's very expensive and dangerous for our communities, and that probably is the priority for us, all issues related to water. And looking forward, obviously we need to harden our infrastructure, but I also wanted to point out an example about thinking creatively and differently just about issues related to flooding. And I wanted to use an example in our region. So we have a county-level forest preserve district, which I know Champaign also has county-level forest preserve district, which manages large tracts of land. We also have many layers of government. So we have our municipalities that are providing storm sewer services, that are managing public right-of-way. We have separate publicly owned treatment works, which are the stormwater utilities or the wastewater utilities. And some communities have them and some don't. So we have park districts which also manage open space. And in the Salt Creek watershed area, there was a large collaboration of these organizations through an umbrella group called the Salt Creek, it's got a complicated name, and I'll have to look it up. But it's a collaboration of the publicly owned treatment works. It's the DuPage Salt Creek Work Group. And all of the publicly owned treatment works, the water utilities are required to meet water quality standards, and they will pay for mitigation measures. At the same time, DuPage County Forest Preserve District was managing a large parcel of land which had 27-hole golf course on it. It was called Oak Meadows. It was nicknamed Soaked Meadows because of the flooding problems. And so with other partners, the municipalities, the wastewater agencies, the park districts got together and said, let's solve this collaboratively. So the Forest Preserve District had the land, and the fix was to take out, to reconfigure the golf course, recreate shoreline, recreate native habitat. They created more than 110 acres of savanna and prairie, 42 acres of flood capacity by taking out 9 holes of golf and recreating this more desirable landscape. So everybody won on that. There's still monitoring to be done, but all of the utilities, water utilities have more opportunities to meet their total maximum daily loads. The Forest Preserve District has a functioning golf course, which they depend on for revenue, and the municipalities have a better opportunity to mitigate the flooding. So I think that's one area, and it's hardening or softening critical infrastructure, if you will, and I think that kind of creative thinking is really important. I will say, kind of jumping ahead to one of the other questions, was what are some of the barriers? Those multiple levels of government and the ability to address it regionally. So if you're one community, the city of Addison, in that Salt Creek watershed, can't do it alone. It really requires collaboration across most of the county.
So in the city of Champaign, we've invested about $48 million in stormwater improvements in the last 5 years, and we have $135 million that's planned in the next 10 years. So that gives you some idea of the costs of the increased stormwater. And some of that is not all climate related. Some of it relates to subdivision regulation and kind of what was allowed and how things have developed over time. I think one of the things that would be helpful from our perspective is to really be working with the university on best practices at our Curtis Road interchange area. So that's the I-57 corridor and Curtis Road. For those of you who are townies and are nodding, or at least know that area, we actually do have a zoning overlay in that area. And so we require 50% of the landscaping to be native or pollinator supporting plants. We're starting to, look at the, types of pavement, permeable pavement, things like that. We've actually reduced some of our parking requirements throughout the city. We started with campus, but it's spreading, recognizing that putting down more pavement is not necessarily what we want, and we certainly want to be encouraging biking and walking and mass transit. So some of it is directly related to climate, and it's an expense that the city is taking on, and some of it is being aware of practices and regulations that exacerbates the problem, and being willing to revisit that.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with one of the challenges being working with other government organizations and consistency across the organizations, so that when a program starts, say at the state level, and then a new administration comes in and it stops all of a sudden, it's hard to plan ahead when you have that kind of variation. So there's been projects through Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity that have come and gone. There's been various kind of weatherization projects that have come and gone. So it really helped to try to get some consistency and continuation of things like that. We do have a stormwater utility fee, as Champaign does, and it's based on percent impervious surface, but then at the single-family homeowner level, it gets averaged across all homeowners, so every parcel, single-family parcel, gets one monthly fee. I would say Illinois allows you to take an average or median, so you might want to calculate it both ways, because I think it would have been better for Urbana, more equitable for Urbana to go with a median instead of an average, because some of the newer properties, and actually some of the ranch properties, tended to bring up the impervious surface. So you can calculate it both ways and see which one comes out more fair. Yeah, I think for water resources, we're lucky that we have a big park district, or big park lake that happens to be in the main floodway from actually the larger. The boneyard starts in Champaign, comes to Urbana. Champaign has done a great job. Champaign and the U of I have done a great job of containing the flooding before it gets to Urbana. So we just have a little section it goes through that we have to work on eventually. But the other one, the saline, is a larger watershed that comes down from the north, and we have a big park that handles the flooding from that mostly. So we don't have to spend that $100 million, which we're very thankful for.
Okay. Well, let me open it up to questions from the audience. So,
hi. So you're talking about how with DuPage County, they'd had a lot of success bringing a bunch of different actors together to solve a regional problem. But often communities don't want to coordinate in the short term. What are some strategies that you found to be effective at bringing communities together to sort of address longer term issues that they may not see in their short term interest?
I guess I'll be the optimist and say that at least at our level, the organization is founded on collaboration between municipalities, so we don't really see that same where they don't want to work together. We obviously have, joiners and we don't. So we have 275 mayors and 107 are signed on to the Greenest Region Compact. So not everybody is on board with it, but I think getting the goals common together and then relationships and camaraderie, the professional groups are a really good way for them to get together. In terms of like the solution for the DuPage Salt Creek work group, that was really quietly done with agencies that didn't get a lot of, they probably get a lot of complaints from the residents and the mayors and the public works directors that we've got to solve this flooding problem, but it was really professional peers that got together and said, let's think creatively about this. So, if they're solving mutual goals, I think some of the barriers to collaboration have to do with different relationships or different responsibilities that may or may not complement one another. Overlapping boundaries. Even park districts for us aren't contiguous with municipal boundaries, so it can be very confusing. You just try to look up who's your elected official and or your property tax bill, and you'll realize that there's so many agencies. Some of them that are not very well known in terms of public participation that I've been working with more recently are the wastewater agencies that have quite a bit of sophistication, lots of authority, usually, many of them are well-resourced and incredibly critical for climate resiliency. And those are now, when you see them working together, I think that we need better partnerships with them, basically surface them a little bit. They're a bunch of smart engineers that don't have a lot of, it's not the same as a city council meeting. You could probably go to a board of directors meeting for a sanitary district and maybe not have a lot of public participation, where I would suspect you're having a lot of speakers at your meeting. So, just to kind of bring out the strengths in the agencies, it does require leadership, which is one of the reasons that we made that a goal in the Greenest Region Compact, is to try to really think regionally. It also helps for us to have some regional leadership in the metropolitan area. We have our Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. It has the same geographic boundaries, 7 metropolitan counties as we do, and they do a lot of the big picture thinking across boundaries, including some of the modeling for risk for flooding. They did a lot of creative, very helpful modeling, which might be something the university could do elsewhere.
I think that question was really for you.
Okay.
other questions? Well, how far do you think concerns about climate change are actually permeating, discussions, like planning discussions that you're part of, and beyond what we are witnessing immediately, which is, of course, stormwater is and flooding is something that we're seeing, but potentially, we could have a heat wave. We need more, capacity for our hospitals to respond. So public health issues. We talked about supply chain disruptions due to, to the food supply. How much of that is really being considered as you're making decisions?
So we actually have, I'm going to get the name of it wrong, I'm going to say, I think it's MIC, Metropolitan Intergovernmental Commission, but it is the local mayors, it's public health, it's our sheriff's department, our police chiefs, our fire. Everybody gets together quarterly and we talk about these types of issues, some disaster planning, but also, planning for maybe not what I would call a disaster, but, could be a public health crisis or some of those other things. And so we do that quite regularly. There's training that's associated with that as well. And we're doing it on a regional basis, so that's countywide.
Yeah, we also, for the emergency planning, we do also have the, it's escaping me now, the mutual aid agreement, so that we actually have the ILEAS, Illinois Law Enforcement Alarm System, which is mutual aid for the whole state, maybe even outside the state. But even locally, we have mutual aid with other parts of the county. So if somebody, when Gifford had a tornado a few years ago, Champaign and Urbana both sent aid for that. So we do cooperate in that way. Some of the other threats that we've had to deal with, we actually have examples of, is emerald ash borer. That could have been climate caused, maybe not, and definitely was probably human enabled at some point along the line. But that's at least a kind of a case to look at and say more things like this could happen. So we have to cut down thousands of ash trees and dispose of them. So things like that can happen. And we've had some experience with it. We also have mosquito abatement. Both cities work with public health to do this mosquito abatement and West Nile virus testing and trapping. The hazard mitigation plan is good experience, I think, and then that goes into a broader sort of resiliency plan. So yeah, I think there's several levels we work on. Yeah, that's in my professional job. I work with CU Public Health, doing modeling and mapping for vector-borne and zoonotic diseases. So that sort of thing too is something that could be exacerbated by climate change. We see already new species of mosquitoes moving into the area, things like that.
Thanks. So that's an interesting question. And so what I've learned with the municipalities, when we did the Greenest Region Compact, we only had 30 sustainability plans to work with, and we now have 107 that are on board with sustainability. And my observation is that the municipalities are really doing a lot of this work, which they think is just taking care of their residents and good governance, and falls under the umbrella of sustainability. And I would probably say, so one of my favorite conversations to have when I was putting this Greenest Region Compact together was with a mayor and chit-chatting to say, so I'm environment director, what are you doing on sustainability? And they might say, well, we haven't done anything yet. We'd like to, but we haven't done a darn thing yet. Well, I had this great database, and I'd look into their database, and I'd pull their rap sheet and show them all the sustainable actions that they were doing, and they didn't realize that's what sustainability was. And I think that's probably true also of climate resilience, that our public works directors are creative and resourceful and collaborative, and we've got planners who are working on flood planning, but they're not calling it climate resilience. And even the social cohesion, I think there was one, if I can use one case study that I was just, as I was preparing for this, revisited something called the CERT, or the Citizen Emergency Response Teams, which were created under the umbrella of Homeland Security after 9/11, and now these corps of volunteers are trained and serve as voluntary civic emergency response volunteers under the auspices of the police. There's also fire ones, some township level governments use them. And just on the drive down, I heard on the radio that ALSIP was announcing the formation of a Citizen Emergency Response Team, or CERT, and one of my communities, Hanover Park said, well, we have a small team, we only have 46 volunteers, but some of the townships have hundreds of these volunteers, and so I think that's resiliency and it's community emergency response, but it's not being called resiliency or preparedness. So I think there's probably, I don't know if you want to respond to that, or you think?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Vanessa.
That starts to speak to something that I'm curious about. If all of the resiliency efforts and systems in place, do they also include some sort of public education component or civic innovation and empowerment component? Because I think some of it is just a lack of awareness among just everyday residents as well. And what efforts do you incorporate into these plans for the public to be more aware and involved?
I'll tackle that one too, and I would say there's much more that can be done. I think on the mitigation actions, when I did the Greenest Region Compact study, what I found, because I read everybody's sustainability goals, that's what the plan was based on, 1,195 sustainability goals, and I sorted them into all kinds of buckets, and 11% of them were related to community education and outreach. So clearly municipalities feel that that's their responsibility and they have some strengths in it. It is one of our goals to educate and engage residents about climate change and resiliency. I don't think it happens again in that more overt way of saying we need to be more responsive. There are actions that are where there's citizen engagement, storm drain stenciling, warnings about making sure that you've got your storm drains clear. That was just in my municipal newsletter. One of the things when I was talking to a police officer about their CERT program that I thought was really neat too was the training that is offered through, they do train the trainer from the Illinois Emergency Management Agency. And one of the great benefits from that is that these volunteers that are embedded in the community now are better able to help their neighbors and independently. So they're better prepared and better able to help their neighbors. So they're not just working as a deployed corps, but if something goes wrong in your own home or your next door neighbor has a crisis, that you've got some basic training in first aid and response that helps first responders, but also makes you a better citizen. So again, I think there's much more going on. There's probably much more that can and should be done to make residents aware that the impacts that they're feeling are a result of climate change, and it's going to be expensive to fix some of these solutions. We have to work together, and we have to see some changes if we're going to get through it.
We have, citizens police academies and similar kinds of things. We also, within our stormwater program, with our stormwater utility fee, we have a whole credits manual where citizens can receive credits for things like rain gardens or rain barrels or permeable pavement, as can commercial. And so by containing stormwater on site or having permeable pavement, there are credits, and we have incentives that are one-time payments or continuing payments depending on what they are. And so I think we've been very good. Our Public Works Department administers that, and they're very good about reaching out and helping particularly the commercial side recognize what they can do to try to bring down their costs, but also to help the environment. We do the same kinds of advertising relating to storm drains, and we have the Feed the Thing in the city of Champaign, which is relating to recycling. And so, there certainly is outreach. I think the comment that there can always be more is one that's important. And then we have specific things throughout either the summer or the year. The city of Champaign is, a monarch-friendly community, and we hold events relating to that, and we work with our park district. And there are other park-related and city-related events where we try to get the information out to our citizens, certainly our website. But I think it takes some looking for, and it's not front of the mind for most of our citizens, and that's something we should be better at.
Yeah, I think education is hard, is what it boils down to. I know from the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Commission, There's a lot of bicycle issues we're always trying to educate about, whether it's how to drive in bike lanes, because you can drive in bike lanes when you're turning and things, and people don't really understand that. And now we have a bike share that's getting started, and there's a lot of questions about that. There's some other new bike infrastructure, like the green bike boxes on Green Street, that people really don't know what to do. And I think the issue of the sustainability issues on how to reduce your carbon footprint are similar. It's hard, and people have so many demands on their attention right now. One more Facebook post, it might get there, might not do it. But yeah, I think it's something everybody is always working on and always needs new ideas on. But yeah, our meetings are open. Both cities televise their meetings, try to get people involved. But yeah, that's definitely an area that needs more work and figure out how to get the word out to everybody.
Okay, I think we'll bring the panel to a close. Please join me in thanking our three panelists and